We believe brain health is a human right. We believe it's a social and economic imperative. At ABI, we're democratizing global brain health by giving people access to the best minds and evidence-based information from around the world. Together, we are distilling complex science and turning it into actionable knowledge for everyone, everywhere. Will you join us?
And a continuing welcome all of you to Aspen Brain Institute's 2021 Expert Series. This week's guest, Mr. Mick Ebeling, where to begin? Recipient of the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian of the Year Award, listed as one of the world's most influential creative people by Creativity 50, named as one of the top 50 world's greatest leaders by Fortune magazine. Mick Ebeling has sparked a movement of pragmatic, inspirational innovation. Founder and CEO of the company Not Impossible, Mr. Ebeling harvests the power of technology and story to change the world. I refer you to his bio on our website for details of his extraordinary credentials. Mick will join us in a few moments in real time for a discussion of his work. But first, he and his team have kindly prepared this recorded document to describe the birth and the evolution of his organization, Not Impossible Labs. Let us enjoy this powerful presentation.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for inviting me back to talk to you. I look back at the last time I was out in Aspen, and my family and I thoroughly enjoyed ourselves, the conversations, meeting the people there, obviously the scenery. So thanks so much for having me back. I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about Not Impossible for those of you that weren't present when I was there last. Talk a little bit about Not Impossible and what we do and how we go about doing it. And then talk a lot about one of the things that we are really focused on right now as our COVID response from the last year. So first, a little bit about Not Impossible. Everything that we do is based on this infatuation, this obsession that we have of looking at the things that are impossible and trying to make them not impossible. And the way that we go about doing that is very much grounded in our mission statement. And our mission statement is change the world through technology and story. And for us, technology, just to unpack that, technology for us can mean so many things, right? It's a near ubiquitous word at this point. Technology for us is what we call technology for the sake of humanity. And it is this by any means necessary mantra that we have of how do we look at problems that exist in the world, social issues, issues that you look at and you just say, that's not right, that shouldn't be that way. And then we convene teams of brilliant makers and hackers and software engineers and programmers and technologists and artists and architects. It's a very eclectic mix of people where we descend upon that particular problem and we try to solve it. And typically what comes out the other side is something that we always say kind of laughingly has duct tape or zip ties somewhere in the solution. But it is a piece of technology, either hardware or software, that creates access, that creates an ability to solve whatever that solution is. And then we try to make it accessible for people, right? Our job is not to create something that is the perfect solution, but that's inaccessible, then that defeats the whole purpose of why we exist. So that's what technology for the sake of humanity means. How can you create something that solves an absurdity and then make it accessible for people? All right, that's the first part of our mission statement. The second part of our mission statement, change the world through technology and story. Story for us is intrinsic to how we think here, right? Everybody that works at Not Impossible in some capacity has either been or now, of course, is a storyteller. And so what we do with story is we use story as that means to scale, because typically we don't enter into these technological forays with a tremendous cash reserve that we can use to buy market share or to buy manufacturing or to buy whatever we need to have it to scale, right? What we do is we use story as that means to scale. And then what we do is we will tell the story powerfully about what we're making, but we focus on why we're making it. And that why is an intrinsic part of our design thinking in our process. And that why and that lens that we look through is called help one, help many. What that means for us is that if I say to you today, who here wants to solve the hunger problem in this country? I'm sure if we were in Aspen and we were in the auditorium, many of you would, if not all of you, would raise your hand and say yes. But if I pressed the matter and said, well, how do you want to do that? Then, some of you might have some ideas. Some of you might have just put your hand up because conceptually you agree with the idea of ending hunger. But when it's described as hunger, it's this big, magnanimous issue that's easy to distance yourself from because there's not a face on the other side. It's just this concept of hunger. But if I said to you, where I'm standing right now in Venice Beach, not more than half a mile away from where I stand, there's a massive homeless community. And on my way to the studio, where I'm at right now, I go by this homeless encampment, and they see me every day, and I say hi to them, they say hi to me. It's part of what living in Los Angeles means nowadays, when you look at kind of the homeless epidemic happening in a lot of our urban cities. And so I was driving by, I was biking by, and I saw this one guy I hadn't seen for a while. I'd never seen him. And I said, wait a second, I don't recognize that guy. So I kind of pulled over and I went over and I said hi to him and I said, hey, how you doing? My name's Mick. And he kind of went back like, what's this guy coming over talking to me? And I said, hey, I live in the neighborhood. I bike by all the time. I always say hi to people when I come by. I just wanted to say hi. And he said, oh, nice to meet you. And so we chatted for a second. I said, hey, I didn't recognize you here, but I'd love to chat a little bit more. But do you mind if I ask, were you in the military? And he said, yeah, how'd you know? And I said, well, I was in the military, my dad was in the military, my grandfather was in the military, my military DAR is pretty strong, and you kind of fit the package. And he said, yeah, I actually was. I said, what branch? He said, Marines. And I said, well, hoorah, thank you for your service, I appreciate that. And he said, oh, you're welcome. And I said, hey, do you mind if I ask, why are you out here? You're in the military. Like, you clearly have been trained to survive situations, war-torn situations. Like, why are you out here right now? And he said, that's a question I ask myself all the time. I did a couple tours over in the Middle East. I saw some things and did some things that kind of scrambled my brain. And when I came back, couldn't quite get my head screwed on straight. I started drinking, I started doing drugs. My parents kicked me out of the house. He's a young guy. And yeah, I'm glad they did. I think it's kind of helping, just kind of really the gravity of kind of what I'm doing to myself right now. It's really setting in. And I said, wow, that's intense. Well, what's your name? He said, oh, my name's Jimmy. And I said, well, Jimmy, thanks for sharing your story with me. I appreciate it. I'll come by, and when I'm coming back, I'll come by and say hi. I said, all right, take care. And so I biked, and now I'm standing in front of you today. So I just asked you guys, how many people here want to solve hunger in this country? And that's this big, magnanimous, faceless issue. But if I phrased it a different way and said, how many people want to make a donation, throw $10 into the proverbial digital hat, and on my way back, I'm going to go buy Jimmy a sandwich. I'll buy him a sandwich and I'll buy him dinner tonight. How many people want to do that? Right? Everybody just raised your hand. Everybody has access to that. Why? Because now hunger has a face. Hunger has a name. Hunger has a story. Maybe you served in the military. Maybe your spouse or friends or loved ones served in the military. Maybe you have a son or daughter who went through some trying times. Maybe you went through some trying times. Whatever it is, now there's a connection to the story of Jimmy that's not just this ubiquitous, kind of magnanimous, undefinable concept of hunger. It's something real. There's a human on the other side of that. That's what Help One, Help Many is. Because if we can create a solution to solve a problem, but do it through the lens of helping one person, and then telling the story powerfully of that one person, then people like yourself, anyone who hears the story of Jimmy or Daniel or Tempt or any of the people I'll tell you about today, now there's a chance to relate to that and say, wait a second, I want to do something. Or maybe I can help deploy that, or I can accelerate that, or I can help fund that. There's something that I can do to help make and use that solution to make the world a better place. Make sense? Okay, all right. So that is Not Impossible 101. Now you understand how we think and how we operate. So chapter 1 of our story happened because this is years ago. My wife and I were scheduled to go out on a date. A friend of mine hijacked our date night, ended up taking us to a gallery event. This event was pulsing with music. People were hugging each other. It was just this great energy in the room. We ended up discovering that the reason that was the case is it was a benefit to raise money for an artist named Tony Tempt Kwan. And he was a paralyzed artist who had Lou Gehrig's disease. And this was a group of his family and friends who had come together to help him pay for his hospital bills and his care. And we had a lovely night. We ended up meeting his father and brother who were the stewards of his foundation. We had a lovely night and then we went home, right? It's great. That was in springtime. Well, in the holidays season, at the time I owned a production company. What we would do is every year we would give bottles of booze or tickets to something or baskets of something. We usually spend between $100 and $200 on our best clients. And the tradition, as most of you probably have experienced either on the receiving or the giving end, is that you give a $100 bottle of booze to someone, your client, and the expectation is that you now expect millions of dollars of business for that $100 or $200 bottle of booze, right? Which is silly. So we decided this year, let's not do that. Let's make a donation on behalf of our clients. And let's make a donation to a charity. And my wife suggested, let's do it for that paralyzed artist that we met back in spring. Because what we learned was that this artist had been using his art and his gift to get kids out of gangs, get them off the streets. And he was an incredible artist, but he also, what he stood for was something that resonated with us. And so we said, that's a great idea. That's what we're going to do. So we got together all the cards, sent them out to all of our clients, basically telling them that in their name we had made a donation to the Tempt One Foundation. Well, we sat down with his father and brother in February after the holiday kind of rush subsided. And we said, hey, we have this donation we'd like to make to you. And they said, oh, thank you so much. And we said, do you mind if we ask, what are you going to use the money for? And his brother and father almost leapt across the table and said, I just want to talk to my brother again. I just want to talk to my son again. And I said, wait a second. Doesn't everybody have one of those Stephen Hawking machines? You know, I'd seen stories and read articles about that device that allows Stephen Hawking to move his eyes back and forth, and then that tracks his pupil, and that moves a cursor on the screen, and that selects the letters, and then that ends up putting a queue of letters together which form words, and then the robot talks, hello, my name is Stephen Hawking. And he said, no, man, that's not the way that it works. Those are if you've got money or insurance, and we don't have enough money or insurance to have one of those things. And I said, then how do you guys talk? He said, we talk through a piece of paper. We have a piece of paper with the alphabet on it, and we run our finger along it, and when our finger gets to a letter that my brother wants, he blinks, and then we write that down, and then we do it again, finger, letter, blink, and eventually that's how we communicate. And he says it's super problematic. If he blinks at the wrong time, if I blink at the wrong time, everything kind of goes haywire. And I just said, oh my God, I have a brother who I'm incredibly close to. I have 3 sons. I couldn't imagine being in a situation where I couldn't talk to my sons or to my brother because I didn't make the right amount of money, because I didn't have the right insurance. That to me was absurd, especially because I live in Los Angeles. We have a GNP greater than most developing nations, and that's how someone was communicating 13 miles from where I'm standing right now. That just didn't make sense. And so I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. I took a minute, gathered myself, and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get you one of those Stephen Hawking machines. And they said, that's amazing. You can do that? And I said, yeah, we're going to figure it out. We're going to get you one of those Stephen Hawking machines. It's incredible, right? But then I said, but let's go another step. Let's figure out how we can hack it. And if there's a way for him to move his eyes back and forth, and that moves a cursor on the screen, let's figure out how he can move his eyes back and forth, and that cursor becomes the paintbrush. That cursor becomes the drawing tool, the spray paint can. Let's figure out a way for him to be able to express himself and do his art again. And they said, you can do that? And I said, and they thought that dumb look on my face was a yes. And they said, oh, this is fantastic. And they got, we kind of chatted for a little bit longer, and we got up and they left. And I said, I got the bill. Well, see you guys later. We can be in touch shortly. And they got up and left. And as soon as they walked out the door, I said, oh my God, what did I just commit to, right? Because I had no business saying that I could do that. But what I felt on that day as a father and as a brother and as a human was that it's absurd that someone doesn't have access to this. And in committing to doing that, what I learned is now a fundamental premise of how we operate at Not Impossible. And it's that when you see something that's absurd, something that you feel in your gut, that you say, that's just not right, that shouldn't be that way, that you commit, and then you figure out how you're going to pull it off. And I cannot tell you how powerful of a way that is to live and to operate. That's how we do everything we do here at Not Impossible. And so, not having a clue how I was going to pull this off, started the process and started to talk to people and network to people and interface with people, and ended up inviting and flying people from all over the world to our house. My wife and kids and I moved out. We moved into a little place in the back. We pushed all the tables and chairs against the wall. And for weeks at a time, we started to hack and program and come up with all these different solutions, and more things failed than succeeded by far, working round the clock. But eventually, after about 2.5, 3 weeks, we finally came up with something that we felt worked. And this device made of cheap sunglasses from the Venice Beach boardwalk, a coat hanger that we duct taped to the side, a web camera that we cracked open and focused back on the pupil, and then some code that you plugged into the computer, and the code actually read it so that that web camera tracked the pupil so it can move it back and forth. This device called the iWriter, we put it on tempt. A bunch of us gathered downstairs in the parking lot. We set up a wireless projector from his room down to the parking lot, where we put a massive projector and projected everything that he was drawing to the projector so people could see it on a wall. This artist who had been lying motionless in a bed for 7 years, unable to talk, unable to communicate, he drew again for the first time. And it was amazing. And then, we all went out and celebrated. We all got drinks and celebrated, and we all went home. And the plan was we were going to improve upon it. Everybody was flying home the next day, but we were going to improve upon it, get him new devices, upgrade the code, but we had done it. We had helped this one artist. And then we woke up. We woke up and it was Time Magazine's top 50 inventions of the year. All of a sudden, press started coming in from all over the world, podcasts and TED Talks. And we just went, wait a second, what is happening right now? We just wanted to help this one dude, but this thing turned into something way bigger than we could have ever imagined. And it made me think, well, maybe I should start to focus my life on using technology to help people. Maybe this whole thing of hacking and looking at absurdities and figuring out how to solve them for people, maybe that's what I should do with my life. And I thought about it and prayed about it and talked to family and friends about it, but eventually said, look, my business was going great. There was no reason to leave it. We'd just come off some of the biggest projects of my career. I'm just going to stick with what I do. I'm going to stick with what my day job is and just keep on keeping on with that. Almost the moment that I made that decision, I got an email from the artist. And the email said, that's the first time I've drawn anything for 7 years. I feel like I've been held underwater, and someone finally reached out and pulled my head up so I could take a breath. I mean, what do you do if you get an email like that? What's your response? Walk away? Just go back to your day job? No. We couldn't. And so that was the origin of Not Impossible. That was the moment that we committed to making technology for the sake of humanity. So chapter 2. Chapter 2 happens, like most great things in life, totally on accident. I'm out to dinner with a friend of mine, and he said, hey, how's Not Impossible going? That's all you ever talk about. I said, we started this thing. We don't know how it's going to play out or what's going to happen, but, we're pouring everything we got into it, and we'll figure it out. He goes, I was reading something the other day, and I think this guy that I was reading about, I think he's going to speak to you. I think you're going to really enjoy it. So his name is Dr. Tom Catena. Go home and research him after dinner, but trust me, I think you're going to love him. I said, great. So we finished dinner. We go home. my friend was right? This guy, Dr. Tom, is this incredible human being. He is based in the Nuba Mountains, which is this war-torn strip of mountains between Sudan and South Sudan. And he is the only doctor within a 1,500-mile radius, this missionary doctor. And I'm reading the story about him and what he does and how he operates in these, remote MASH-like unit situations in hospitals. And it talks about all the things that he has to do, perform, deliver babies or perform serious surgeries, pull teeth, draw blood. He's the only guy. But it talked about the one thing he hates to do is to perform amputations. And so it made me dig into that a little bit and research, why is this guy performing so many amputations? That's an odd thing to see in this article. And he said, as I dug into it, the reason is because this region is constantly being bombed by the then reigning president, President Omar Bashir. And Bashir, just to put it in context, was the guy who brought you the genocide of Darfur, right? This is a bad, nasty guy. And what he would do is he would regularly run these campaigns of terror where we'd have 55-gallon drums filled with jet fuel and shrapnel. He would roll them out of the back of planes. They would hit typically civilian targets, markets and bazaars and churches and schools. He even targeted hospitals. This guy is a horrible human being. But they would hit, and these giant Molotov cocktails would hit the ground and they'd spray shrapnel everywhere. And that's what would either kill you or maim you. And so the story went on as I'm reading about this, and it talked about this one particular boy named Daniel, this 12-year-old boy, who was out tending his family's goats and cows. And he heard the bombers come as they come every single day. And he looked around and he looked for a place to hide, like a rock to hide behind, or a tree or a foxhole, because they have them everywhere, because this happens all the time. And he sees a lone tree and he runs and he gets behind the tree and he wraps his arms around the tree. And his body, luckily, is protected from the blast, from the bomb that went off not far from where he was. And his body was protected from the blast, but because his arms were on the other side, it blew off his arms. But what got me even more than just the image of this now armless 12-year-old boy was what the article said that Daniel said when he woke up. He said, now he realizes he's a double amputee. He said, if I could die, I would, because now I'm going to be such a burden to my family. What 12-year-old boy wakes up, realizes that he's a double amputee, and then says, my poor family, not poor me. And so I went, all right, I don't know what, I don't know how, but I got to do something. My 12-year-old was asleep just down the hall where I was reading this article, and it just stirred up so much emotion in me. I said, I got to do something. So woke up the next day, told my wife, she said, are we having to move out of our house again and a bunch of crazy, brilliant people are going to move in? I said, yep, sure enough. And that's exactly what we did. All these people came from around the world. They flew in. We started to hack and program and create. On November 17th, 4 months from the day that I first went out to dinner with that friend of mine, and I read the article about Dr. Tom, this happened. There's this thing in me that loves to see things that are supposed to not be done, be done.
Daniel is just one of 50,000 amputees left in the wake of the bloodiest war Africa has ever known. We flew into an active war zone in Sudan with 3D printers, laptops, spools of plastic, and the goal to build Daniel an arm.
You ready?
The concept of Project Daniel was hatched on July 11th. And on November 11th, Daniel fed himself for the first time in 2 years. But it's never about just one person. If we could teach the locals to do it themselves, then Project Daniel could live on long after we left. And it did.
So that's Project Daniel. If the iWriter kind of showed us the way in terms of the vision of Not Impossible, Project Daniel put us on the map. We ended up winning more awards, more accolades, more notoriety for that one project. And that's not why we did it, but what it taught us an incredibly valuable lesson, because throughout the process of that, I ended up reaching out to this little company called Intel. And I met with their CMO and said, hey, we're going to go to Sudan and we're going to deploy with this 3D printing solution. We're going to teach a village how to 3D print arms. And we're going to launch this. It's going to be the world's first 3D printing prosthetic lab. And this is going to be it's going to be the epitome of technology doing good in the world. Would you like to help us? And I always joke that she kind of said, oh, of course. And she reached into her couch cushions and handed us a couple shekels and said, here you go. Good luck. For that small investment that Intel made, they won more awards that year. They had more brand lift, more positive communications. It became easier for recruiting and for retaining their people. This little thing demonstrated that what we have learned in all of the different activities and all the different absurdities that we tackle is that in partnership with corporations, because that's a component of how we operate, that when a company does good, it's good for their business. It's good for their branding. It's good for their recruiting. It's good for their retention. It's good for their growth. Harvard did a study talking about companies that stand for purpose and do good grow faster than companies that don't. Doing good is good business. And for us, we see what we do as a movement. We're a for-profit company. We have a nonprofit arm that we channel 100% of the proceeds towards helping the people that we serve in the for-profit. But what we see Not Impossible as is more than a tax structure or a tax code. We see it as a movement. Because what happens when companies, people like yourself say, wait a second, I'm going to go do something. I can do something in the context of my business or my corporation or something. When the private sector drives change, it always has amazing impact. And that's what Not Impossible is about. How do you drive the most amount of impact without being restrained by the confines of large nonprofits or government institutions? How can we be nimble and impatient on deploying the solutions that are going to change the world? So we now are working on a lot of different other things. The future chapters of Not Impossible are various and wide. We have deployed ways that the deaf can experience music through the neuroplasticity of changing the reception of sound through the vibration of your eardrums and having a signal being sent to the brain, of having the skin be that receptor. And so with wireless wearables, we've created software and hardware that translate those signals and vibrate on the skin. And so now someone who is deaf or hard of hearing now has the ability to feel music through their skin. That then we had another beautiful accident that then evolved into a wearable solution to symptoms of Parkinson's. And we're now in clinical trials where we've modified that tool to help the deaf experience music, and we've now modified that as a solution to abate or prevent or eliminate symptoms of Parkinson's when you're wearing this. We've worked on vaccine distributions into the developing world with simple, basic vaccines. We have a whole wide array of different things that we're working on, but the thing that we are most passionate about right now, especially coming out of about a year around the pandemic, is that you go back to March and we started to see and read and see all the things that were happening and school closures. And we said, there's going to be a lot of kids, a lot of families that are going to go hungry. Kids are going to be off of their free and reduced meal programs. Families are going to lose their jobs. We got to do something, because if we don't deal with hunger, if we don't deal with food security, we're going to have a massive problem in our society. So we started to research and look at all the different ways that food is deployed and how people are fed. And we've been obsessed about this for a while. So the COVID really brought it to a head for us. And what we realized in all of our research is that When we would interview people who were food insecure and we asked them, what is it that you prize most? Typically, majority of the time, they would say a cell phone, which was surprising to us. But what we learned is that cell phone is a connective tissue to the world. It connects us to the world. It doesn't know where you live or where you sleep or who you sleep with or who you pray to or what color your skin is. It is just this anonymous, unbiased access to the world that you have. And so we said, all right, let's use the cell phone as that vehicle to do that. And we carved out a solution that is very simple. It is a text-based platform where we give this enterprise software to nonprofits, to cities, to governments. They ingest the phone numbers of the people that they are serving into that. And then it starts a simple text bot, a simple text chat, where the user enrolls themselves into it through the organization. They type the word hungry. Then the chat bot shows them restaurants that are close to them. They're offered a choice of meal items from that restaurant. They choose the meal item, and then they're able to walk into a restaurant that's close to them and pick up a meal to go just like everybody else. So now they don't have to go all the way across town and wait in a long line. They don't have to take a bus or borrow a car, take time off work, time off school. They can go to some place close to them and get a nutritious meal that's curated, that they had agency and choice to choose. But the best thing about it is they walk in and claim the meal in a dignified way. There's no shame. There's no lack of dignity. They walk in and claim the meal and walk out, and they're able to eat. So this solution relies on not having to reinvent a system to feed people. We have restaurants. Those restaurants are in the business of making nutritious, healthy food for people, especially if you curate that menu item. Since we've launched this, we've fed over 100,000 people just in our pilot cities. And just a couple weeks ago, we received our first million meal order, which was followed the following week by our second 500,000 meal order. We're going to be deploying this in different cities and expanding our pilot cities all across the country. So if this is something that speaks to you, if food insecurity and the hunger problem in this country speaks to you, please, we're flashing up a QR code and a website. Please go there. If you're so inclined to make a donation of meals, that would be fantastic. If there are things that you want to contribute in terms of introductions to governments, to large nonprofits that you think that this might be able to help them, we want to get people fed. And if there's something that you think that you can do to help get more people fed, please reach out. So we're often asked, how do you figure this stuff out? Like, how do you do this? What's your process? And over time, we've developed a very well thought out design thinking process, right? Corporations around the world are bringing us in to talk to them about innovation and problem solving and collaboration and disrupting systems that need to be positioned to do more for whatever that company is doing. But what we really have learned is that the reason we're able to pull most of the things off that we're able to do is because of what we believe is our secret sauce. And that is beautiful, limitless naivete. We don't know what we're not supposed to be able to pull off. We didn't get the memo that we're not the right ones to be able to do this. We bring in brilliant people from a variety of different fields and expertises, but typically, within Not Impossible, the organization, we don't have the degrees or the diplomas or the credentials to be able to do this. What we have is this fire, this passion around seeing absurdities that have to change and saying that must change. And then we commit and then figure it out and we find our one. So if you think about all the stories that I've told you today, the thing that I would ask you as you go back into your lives, I would ask you to reflect on the fact that if you're watching this right now, if you're watching this in the confines of your home or your office, we're blessed. We are blessed. We don't worry about where our next meal is coming from. We're not worried about where our kids are going to sleep tonight. My question is, how are you going to use your blessings? What are you going to do with the blessing of your life? How can you use what you've been given and gifted to try to make the world just a little bit better? So the question I really want to ask you is this: who is your one? Who is that one person? You read about them, you drive by them, you see them, maybe you even know them. What if you chose one person to try and go and help right now? What would happen? It's a pretty simple equation, right? If every person in the world went out and helped one person, we'd live in a pretty good world. But given who I'm speaking to right now, it's pretty safe to say you're not going to stop at one person. That's the gateway to many people being helped. And one person will lead to another, and now you've caught fire, and many people will be helped. But don't believe that you're not the one to do it. You are the one to do it. But how do you start with one? So my question is, who is your one? Or in the context of everything I've talked to you about today, maybe a different way to say it is, who is your Daniel? Who is your Daniel? So thank you guys so very much. Again, it's my honor to be able to speak to you today. If you want any more information on Not Impossible, feel free to go to notimpossible.com. Thanks so much. Be safe. And go out and make the world and your world not impossible.
Mick, welcome back to Aspen Brain Institute. You are a favorite guest.
Thank you so much.
And the importance of your sharing this video, no amount of your telling us about your work could prepare us for the moment of joyous transformation as we watch Daniel feeding himself for the first time in 2 years, as we watch Daniel throwing a ball to you. In those moments, we truly feel the impossible become possible. So let's unpack the concept of impossibility. As a psychiatrist, I recognize that the expression of impossibility is frequently a kind of generic defense, if you will, against failure, or in more clinically serious situations, a symptom of apathy, depression, even despair. But we are interested in your non-clinical perspective, Mick. Certainly the last year has been characterized by a collective sense of unpredictability. We shared experiences of brilliant scientific achievement, heretofore believed to be impossible, the rapidity of vaccine development and subsequent rollout from a population perspective, and yet the individual end user experience was characterized by tremendous frustration and clear inequity. Many people required numerous hours at the computer simply to locate vaccines and appointment times. That is, those who had access to computers and the internet. So once again, a case of the haves and the have-nots. And certainly this serves as yet another reminder of work that needs to be done, as agency for so many people was greatly diminished. Mick, your persona radiates optimism. So how do we bottle you? How can we use you as a force multiplier to inspire us all to a different way of thinking, especially after our experiences of the last year?
Well, that's very sweet. So thank you. But I think that what we do here at Not Impossible Labs is enabled and catalyzed by our thinking and our way of seeing the world through this lens of everything that surrounds us that is possible right now was impossible first. And so when you start to see the world through that lens, you don't see the world as that's not going to work, or that's not going to happen, or that's never going to change. you're constant, and that's not to say that those feelings of doubt or fear or concern don't rise up. It rises up for us all the time, but we're able to challenge our own pessimism and skepticism with this hardcore, ridiculously data-driven historical fact that everything that's possible today was impossible first. So that's what drives us. That's what allows us to see the world, even in our darkest times, to see the world with a light at the end of the tunnel, or with this kind of slightly optimistic viewpoint on what could be. And I think that when you look at what's transpired over this last year, you want to talk about just shocking and challenging us to our actual core. But again, going back in history, I was a political science major, so I studied a lot of history. You look at history and you watch how civilizations, you watch how segments of the population over eras have evolved. And, you know, the saying, what does not kill you will only make you stronger, that's sadly incredibly appropriate right now. Is that we as a species, we have lost a lot of people and lost a lot of loved ones. But as a species, we will come out the other side. And in doing so, how will the world be better? How will we as humans be better? How will this challenge kind of our way of thinking? And you can go through so many examples of how this last year has challenged so many things that we thought never, ever had the possibility of change. And lo and behold, it did. So that's just yet another example of the fact that truly nothing is impossible.
Mick, to take your work and perhaps even your psyche to the laboratory of neuroscience, when we think about the brain health pillars, we are often quick to identify the obvious: nutrition, aka wild salmon, blueberries and kale, exercise, sleep, stress management. But let's start with the basics, the fuel in the tank, food and hunger.
I mean, obviously, in the talk, you heard me get passionate about what we're doing in the hunger space. If you're watching this right now, we're privileged, right? We're privileged by every stretch of the imagination, or every letter of the definition. We're privileged. We are in a house or an apartment or a condominium. We're watching it on a computer. We've got high-speed internet. We're not worried about whether or not we're going to get thrown out of our place the next day, or whether our next meal is going to come from. So we're blessed. We're blessed and we're privileged. We are a segment of the population that does not truly understand what it means to have the most essential thing in your life be unstable. And when you look at health, when you look at not just physical health, but you look at the health of our society, the health of our communities, you can talk about a lot of essentials. You can talk about having a home. You could talk about having a job. You could talk about having clothes. You could talk about a lot of different things. If you don't start with water and food, the two most essential things, you're done. It's over, right? You can live in a mansion and have no food, and you're gone in 4 to 5 days. You can live on the streets, but have a regular source of nutrition coming to you, and you can survive indefinitely. So for us, we really see this as it's an issue around society. It's an issue that is a gap that we must address. You know, the saying by Bertolt Brecht, food first, then morality. Food first, then morality. The decision to do something horrible is superseded by the decision to eat or feed your family, right? That is kind of where we're at. And if you take that all the way back to how we exist as humans and how our brain functions, I live in a community in Venice Beach where when kids used to walk up and down our street going to the public school, I would see a lot of kids walking with a bag of Cheetos and a grape soda, and that was their breakfast on their way to work or on their way to school. when you think of how the brain evolves, when you think about how we as, the brain is what helps to drive how we think, how we envision the future, how we see ourselves, our self-esteem, what we want to make possible. If you put crappy fuel in the tank, is it any surprise that the communities that have the poorest nutrition are having the poorest outcomes in other areas? So what if we take this crazy idea and just shift it from horrible, crappy food to okay food, right? Let's not go all the way to line caught, salmon and hand-picked kale. Let's kind of go, let's evolve it a little bit. What would happen to our society? What would happen to the health and well-being of the communities that end up being, if you think about this from a hardcore kind of economic standpoint, the most unhealthy communities cost our society, cost our cities and our states the most amount of money. What would happen if all of a sudden you injected good health into these communities? What kind of transformation would you see? So that's for us, we have a mantra at Not Impossible, specifically with the Hunger Initiative, with Hunger Not Impossible, is we say, if you think back to the dawn of Amazon and what people saw, and for the first, I'd say for first chapter of Amazon's existence, people would say, oh yeah, Amazon, they just sell books, right? They don't sell books. They were creating a relationship that now they've evolved to being, one of the biggest companies, the most powerful companies in the world. What we do at Not Impossible around this Hunger Initiative, we kind of like to say cheekily is that, yep, we're just feeding people. We're just feeding people. Because it is so, so much bigger.
Well, it's interesting that you speak of Amazon in the context of creating relationships. As I know, less known and also important to the society, to the health of a society, is a sense of purpose of its members, as well as social connectedness and community. And the data about the morbidity and mortality of loneliness. Now, interestingly, there is no region of the brain, no innovative brain lobe or area. Innovative thinking occurs when regions of our brain, which normally ignore or exclude each other, begin to start working together. Neurologists see this in the functioning of highly creative people like artists. And it was also noted in the preserved brain of Albert Einstein. It strikes me that you do employ a similar methodology when you create the conditions for creativity and innovation in Not Impossible Labs. You have described occasions when you have opened your home for specific initiatives, including certainly the Daniel Project, literally transforming it into a dormitory of incredibly diverse people with dramatically contrasting skill sets, engineers, software developers, sociologists, artists, public health specialists, physicians, all united not necessarily by their professional expertise, but by their intense commitment to make a better world. So Mick, it's clear that social connectedness, community, and purpose are critical components to your success with Not Impossible Labs. What are some of the other essential ingredients?
For our success, the essential ingredients, at the end of the day, there has to be a tenacity. If you're part of our team, there has to be a relentless tenacity around this sentiment, this feeling of urgency that what we're doing is so much bigger than ourselves, right? I came from a Jesuit education. My wife and I always joke that we had 2 Jesuits and a Franciscan marry us, so even if we wanted to get divorced, it wouldn't be possible. And their kind of the Jesuit mantra is be a man for others, right? It was an all-boys school. And I think that when you adopt this understanding of how powerful it is to be in service of others, it just opens up the horizon in terms of what you see as possible. So for us, people have to have that sense of tenacity, that sense of drive. One of our core values is impatience at the company. You have to be impatient in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. So you kind of pile that all together, and that's what makes a non-impossible person and non-impossible team member in terms of our construct of how we operate.
Well, it's interesting. Tenacity makes me think of another question, and that has to do with failure. I know as a scientist, failure is an essential and inescapable part of science. It's embedded in the scientific method. We hypothesize, we observe, we measure, we test, and of course we get it wrong. And original hypotheses are revised. Scientists come up with new hypotheses, observe more, test again. What is your experience and the role of failure, if you will, at Not Impossible Labs?
I mean, failure for us, I'm looking around right here to see if I have a copy. Oh, no, I just have the, here, this is actually funny. This is the Russian translation of my book, right? So I won't attempt to try to read this, but in the US version, in the English version, one of the chapters that is fail, 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 succeed, repeat as necessary. And so we see this progress towards accomplishing and transitioning from impossible to possible. We see it as it is the culmination of many failures, right? It's the culmination of us trying and failing and learning, and trying and failing and learning, and trying and failing and learning, and figuring out how we can take the summation of all the things that we've learned from those failures and using that to drive us forward. So every time we fail, we're like, we celebrate, we say, sweet, we're one step closer to, what we think is going to work.
Mick, you often say, help one, help many, that storytelling is the means to scale. And as you describe, if you ask people, do you want to solve hunger? Of course they do. But when you tell the story, your personal story, with your experience with Jimmy in Venice Beach and how you connected with this homeless vet, we all want to help you buy a sandwich for Jimmy, because hunger has a face, Jimmy has a story, and humans engage with stories. From the perspective of neuroscience, when we listen to a story, our brain activity starts to synchronize with that of the storytellers. Storytelling activates brain regions involved in imagining another person's perspective. So if I were telling a story about you, Mick, I might include your personal experiences, basketball, the Air Force, filmmaking, never mind that you're 6'6". When I think about Jesuits and basketball, oh my, Gonzaga must have hurt the other night. How has all of this shaped who you are as a storyteller?
We are the sum of our life experiences, right? And I think there was I think it was Les Brown who said once, all of us are self-made, but only the successful will admit it, right? And so I will modify that and say all of us are self-made, but only the self-aware will admit it, right? Because the definition of success changes from person to person. So I feel like I am the summation of my experiences, and I just need to remember and call upon them in a way and take inventory of my past experiences so that you don't forget the lessons that we have learned in the past. I'm sure many of you might have read Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey right now. It's a fantastic, it's a good book. I'm listening to it, and it's so entertaining. The thing I take away from, besides him being a fantastic storyteller, the fact that he reflects back on his experiences and the lessons that he learns. Like, I think that the part of my book, when I wrote my book, it forced me to reflect back on my life and what that contributed. And so the book is a reflection of all of my life experiences and what has led me to now. And I think, as humans, we just have to remember that. Like, let's not forget what we've learned over this past year. There's a lot of valuable lessons that we've learned about being empathetic, about being understanding, about being just better humans, and what it means to feel like we are not a divided world, but a world that is all suffering, all, encountering the same pandemic. And I think that it's just that time to reflect and to remember. And sometimes we don't give ourselves, myself included, we don't give ourselves the time to do that, because then it allows us to be better humans.
Mick, you ask us to go back into our lives, to pause, to remember that we are blessed. As the pandemic wanes, we hope we will be able to join you soon in Venice, invited or not, for great surf, great food, but especially great company. So we are blessed, but still there is existential climate change. How do we take your important reminders about our many blessings and apply that beyond ourselves to the most challenging world problems at a time when we are especially all so exhausted? Your wise counsel.
Why? I will never claim to be wise. I'll just claim to repeat the things that I understand and know. If I understand the question is, what would I say to someone who wanted to kind of live a not impossible life, right? And to have that perspective. For me, and if you read my book, you'll see that I reference her in my book, but I reference Ayn Rand or Ayn Rand, depending on your kind of potato. But a very polarizing author, but someone who, if you take the core of what she wrote, political, kind of opinions aside, she wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. And The Virtue of Selfishness basically took the traditional definition of altruism and selfishness and reversed it. And the position that she takes is to be truly selfish is to be selfless. Because the feeling and the sentiment that you have when you give of yourself to another human being, and that other human being's life is better because of you, is the most selfish thing that you could ever do. And so why it's a semantical argument that she's making, it really rang true for me. And I guarantee if you're listening right now, if you're watching right now, you could probably take a step back and say, at what point in your life, when you gave of yourself, when you helped someone else, and you were truly selfless and trying to make someone else's life better, how many of you could say that that didn't nurture your soul, that didn't make you feel better? So what if you craved that addiction? What if you sought out in your life a way to try to make other people's lives better? Because we're blessed, so we can, so why not? Like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you share the blessing of your life? And so that's really for us, how we think, how I think, how I'm trying to teach my kids to think. But I don't know, that's how I see the world.
It's interesting. And as a neuroscientist, I translate that in small part, to the molecule of dopamine, not just as the molecule of pleasure, but the molecule of anticipation. The anticipation of a better world. And Mick, you inspire that in us. You inspire us to be the best versions of ourselves, and simultaneously that is brain healthy and, as you repeatedly remind us, not impossible. We look forward to hearing from you again and again, and to becoming an integral part of your movement. I know people will want to be involved in specific ways. And as I heard you talk about the cascading impact of the fundamentals of food and hunger, and I see you handing Jimmy a sandwich, I think the food initiative is particularly compelling. But how would you advise people as to how they might support your work?
Right now, it's incredibly simple. We are so hyper-focused on this idea of meals per month. How can you give 1 meal, 10 meals, 100 meals per month? And we do it by the month because we want to give a semblance of stability to this population that we're serving, so that their brains can think about tomorrow. They can think about tonight when they wake up, not think about the next 4 hours. So the easiest, most simplest way is you can go to our website, you can look at the Hunger Initiative, Hunger Not Impossible, and make a donation on a reoccurring fashion. You know, how many meals per month can you donate? Because that level of consistency, it begins, it's the help one, help many mantra that we talked about. That's what starts this tidal wave of impact. And we are striving, we will hit 100 million meals per month happening in our future very, very soon. We're absolutely 100% committed to that. And you know, our recent order of 1 million meals in the city of Chicago is a testimony to that came forth. And that was, you know, you believe as an entrepreneur, you believe that you can do things, but there's always that little bit of doubt. And then all of a sudden 1 million meal order comes in and you went, all right, look, it's true. Not just us believing it, that this is actually happening. And that's beginning to cascade and exponentialize as well. So that would be the easiest way and a tax deductible way to just donate on a reoccurring meals per month. And the other way is, you know, I'm very clear with the audience that I'm speaking to right now. It's a very astute audience, and an audience that is, you know, very business savvy. Having been to there before and met a lot of the people there, is we're about to go out and raise our next round for the Hunger Initiative. We did our angel round, and now we're going to go do our seed round. If you are in the investment community, if you're an educated investor and this is something that you believe in what we're doing, you know, Amazon sold books. That's all they do is just sell books. Bento is the name of the company. Bento and Hunger Not Impossible, we just feed people. So if you get that smile, if you can see the smile on my face when I say that, we're up to much, much bigger things with what we're doing with the Hunger Initiative. And so we'd love for you to, you know, talk to us about helping us fortify and expand what we're doing in this next round.
We see the smile on your face, Mick. We feel the smile on your face. And thank you, Mick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And
to our loyal global audience, we invite you to visit aspenbraininstitute.org for more information about Mick Ebeling and Not Impossible Labs, with further reference to their new projects and to learn how we can strengthen their impact. You can access there as well all ABI recordings, summaries, resources, and upcoming new events. Thank you, and see you all again soon.